Nothing like a miraculous catch of fish to get us to believe in Jesus over and beyond our own capacity. That's what happens in the gospel today from Luke chapter 5. Jesus shows up in ways extraordinary. And when he does that, he is able to call all sorts of people to follow him beyond what they're used to. The same can be said about the saint that we celebrate today on this Solemnity of St. Patrick. I have to admit, this is the first time I've ever celebrated St. Patrick on March 18th. But because it's a solemnity here in the Archdiocese of New York, that's why. Because St. Patrick is the patron saint of the entire diocese. So you guys are actually kind of special. We never, in all the other dioceses I've ever been in, we never celebrated St. Patrick's Day. It was always just a Lenten commemoration. It was never a liturgical feast as it is here in the Archdiocese. So whenever you have a solemnity that falls on a Sunday during Lent, you can't celebrate that solemnity during that day, so they have to go to the next day that's available, and that's today, the 18th of March. Go figure. My Irish relatives would also be scratching their head. What? The 18th of March, what? God can always surprise us, right? We see the same thing with Jeremiah that we heard in that first reading, the call of Jeremiah. God says basically to Jeremiah, do not be afraid. I'm going to put my words in your mouth. And what it is that I say to you, you are to proclaim. It is a matter of having a confidence not in oneself, but in God. And St. Patrick's life also reflects that too. He grew up in Tibernia in what's on the island of Great Britain. We're not exactly sure where that town of Tibernia is. They're not sure. He was captured as a youth by pirates from Ireland, and then he was sold as a slave to be a shepherd boy in the hills of Ireland. You know, there's plenty of sheep still there today. And during that time, he reflected upon his youth and the dissipation of his youth, and he figured basically that the reason why he had been enslaved was because of his neglect of the commandments of God, meaning neglect of fervor, neglect of the Christian upbringing that he had received. He was supposedly the son of either a deacon or a priest. Remember back in the day, at that time, there was such a thing as men who were ordained after they had been married. So, St. Patrick, reasoning thus, begins to converse with God, and he learns to pray in those lonely hills of Northern Ireland where he was a shepherd boy. And then one day he hears God tell him, go, leave, and walk in this particular direction, and there you will find a ship eventually. And he does, and he finds a ship, and there's some men there about ready to sail off, and he's able to get passage on the ship, and then even provides for them when they land in some other place, and they have no food, no provision, and they're starting to heckle Patrick as a Christian. No, pray to your God if you're this Christian or whatever. Pray to your God. And Patrick does. And suddenly these wild boars come by, and they're able to hunt them, and they're able to be fed. But Patrick, though, has to go through his own little journey where he is inspired by God. He has a dream in which two Irish youths speak to him and say, "Oh, holy boy, come back and teach us the gospel." So he then goes to France and is taught what he needs in order to be ordained, and eventually is sent as a bishop. And when he lands in Ireland, we can't imagine that he simply was able to convince everybody by his own rational power that God is real, but instead, as is typical for us Christians, and I'm going to say that it's typical and it should be normative, that God begins to do miracles through people that he sends, through the people who proclaim the gospel. That's all of us, really, if we trust God enough. But it means, again, not having our trust in ourselves. And our gospel reading today from Luke, we see Peter is really getting challenged, okay? Because Peter is a professional fisherman. There's nobody who knows more about fishing on the Lake of Galilee or the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Gennesaret than these men, these four men, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. That's their livelihood. Imagine me, somebody who studied just theology, going up to a carpenter and saying to him, hey, do it this way, which is actually, by the way, the wrong way to do it. That's what Jesus does. He comes up to Peter basically and he says, yeah, I know it's daytime and that's not the right time to fish. You're supposed to fish at night. And you caught nothing, but yeah, go ahead and cast the nets now and you'll see. Imagine, here's this guy. He's like, am I going to trust a rabbi who's telling me to fish at the wrong time? He takes a gamble. Peter takes a gamble and says, okay. And in other accounts, of course, it says that Jesus says to cast the nets on the right side of the boat, which is also, by the way, the wrong side of the boat to cast the nets on, because you want the nets to be farther away from the boat so they can catch more. So if you're going to cast the nets, and most people are right-handed, you're going to go to the left side of the boat, because that's how you naturally get a good cast of your net. Otherwise, you're just popping the net into the water. So imagine being told to do the wrong thing at the wrong time and to expect results. And God likes to humble us that way. And this is what St. Patrick teaches us as well. Think of the humility it took for him to have to go back to an area where he might have had bitter thoughts of the suffering that he endured as a shepherd boy. To go back there and to preach. To go back there and to explain the way of the gospel. To go back there and to establish the Christian communities, converting kings, and doing so sometimes by having God use him in very powerful ways. So today, on the feast of St. Patrick, we ask God for that kind of humble trust that, one, God is going to speak to us as he did Jeremiah, to let us know exactly what it is that he wants us to say or do at the right time or the right place. And that might mean, like St. Peter, that he's asking us to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. That is, wrong according to human thinking. Wrong according to how we've all come to believe. Because God is God.